Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So we begin with the chant. If you'd like to chant along, it's on your last page of your book. Otherwise, you can just allow the vibrations to soak into you. Om Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Avir Avir Maeti Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam Tenamam Pahi Nityam Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. O Lord, light us through and through, and guide us evermore with thy loving presence. Om, peace, peace, peace to all beings everywhere. I want to thank every one of you for coming today. I feel like we're experiencing a new situation with our parking going on, so thank you for making the long walk if you had to be here. We'll see how this lasts. I'm hoping it's just the 3-day weekend. So today we have a beloved speaker, Peter Bolland. He is at Southwestern College, and he's also the department chair, I believe, of the philosophy and Eastern spirituality over there, Eastern religions. So we are very fortunate today. He is one of our, it's been a long time since you've spoken, right? First time this year, okay. He's going to be sharing today about one of the Upanishads, the Katha Upanishad, the wisdom of the Katha Upanishad. And in this, you're going to hear about a little bit about the dialogue of death between two characters, Nachiketa and Lord Yama, the Lord of Death. So in this interaction, he's really going to bring out kind of like, what is this all about? So this is one of this Katha Upanishad is actually one of the ones that Swami Vivekananda really used to love this book. And we chant this Upanishad on his birthdays. So Peter, you're going to find out Peter also is not only a talented speaker, but he's a talented musician. And we may have a little music from him at the end. So first, let's welcome Peter Bolland. Thank you.
Thanks, Swami. Thank you, Swami. It is always an honor to be here and a pleasure. What a wonderful song and performance from our music team. Y'all do something that doesn't happen anywhere else, and I appreciate that. And for everybody who's a longtime part of this community or maybe a first-time visitor, welcome. Yeah, it was a little bit of a fraternity hazing getting in here this morning. I foolishly arrived in the neighborhood about 10:15, which seems generous for an 11 o'clock start time. And I found myself in this crazy gridlock that you found yourself in. So these are the unintended consequences that ripple out. And it's appropriate when as we start a talk on the Katha Upanishad, which is a dialogue with Lord Yama, the Lord of Death, that there is a murder of crows in the tree outside, screaming. You just can't plan this kind of thing. So hello to everyone on Zoom. Where's the camera? Over here. And hello to everyone in the room. So I have been teaching the Katha Upanishad and Vedanta and Hindu philosophy, along with many other world's wisdom traditions, as part of my career as a community college philosophy and comparative religion and mythology professor. So I come at this work from that angle, and I assure you it's a little nerve-wracking to come into a room like this where the bookshelves are stacked with books on the Upanishads, where we have a tradition here where this is not just another tradition in the world, but the home tradition of so many who call this place their spiritual home. And I really honor that and appreciate that. And I stand before you humbly. I'm going to keep this simple. I just want to start at the beginning. And I've literally typed most of the Katha Upanishad onto PowerPoint slides. And I want to kind of read through it with you in the Eknath Iswaran translation. and go looking for what wisdom we can find to apply to our life, whether we are ardent followers of the Vedanta path or one of the many margas in the Hindu universe, or we come at this as curious people from all kinds of different wisdom and faith traditions. It's all good, and that's how it's supposed to be. So I'm here in that spirit. And oh, this thing makes a big noise, but it doesn't advance the slide. It was working a second ago. It's kind of a beep. Yeah, I wonder if. Okay, thank you. And now it's working. Yeah, we just had to wake it up. So now we are all together here. So yeah, this is setting up the work today. I want to dive into one of the most enduring and popular of the Upanishads, the great classics of Indian philosophy and spirituality, written around the first millennium BCE. There's controversy about the origin dates. We aren't here to adjudicate all of those scholarly debates. We can just generally say that this collection of texts that we call the Upanishads come in the first millennium BCE generally. And they are a little different than the earlier and older Vedas, the Rig Veda and so on, which seemed to be more outward turned. When you dive into the Vedas, you find scripture written by priests, for priests, about how to pray to this god and that god, Agni and Varna and Rudra, gods that evolve into other gods in later Hindu expressions. So the Vedas are extremely ancient, maybe 3000 BC. And by the time we get to the first millennium BCE, we see this new body of work called the Upanishads. And as you see there, the word literally in Sanskrit seems to mean things like connection or equivalence, but it comes to also mean sitting near a teacher. And the Upanishads are most widely understood then as the records of dialogues between teachers and students. These are people who dedicated their lives to the study of Vedic wisdom, and they are now in deep dialogue about the meanings they find there, about the experiences they're having. So is divinity in the gods to be propitiated to make offerings to ask favor of, or is divinity within us? To be realized, to be brought to the surface of our confused awareness. That seems to be the twin projects of the earlier Vedas and the later Upanishads. And so when we speak directly about Vedanta, the Vedanta movement, the word Vedanta, as most of you might know, means the culmination of the Vedas. And that is to say, one way of thinking about the Upanishads, and the way in my business, in academic study of these things, we refer to the Upanishads as late Vedas. They are simply the last written expression of that great Vedic outpouring of wisdom literature. So with all of that kind of in place, then, we're going to be drawing from that book that you saw the cover of there. I just want to say a word about that. My favorite English translations, not the only ones, but Eknath Easwaran is a curious character, Indian-born, fell in love with, of all things, English literature and got his PhD, studying Emily Bronte and stuff like that, and came to Berkeley and was a professor at UC Berkeley his whole academic career. And he died, I think, back in the 80s, if I'm correct, something like that. And he's the first guy that ever taught meditation or yoga at UC Berkeley. And he is known to people in my line of work as really the clearest translator of the great works of Indian philosophy. His Bhagavad Gita is my favorite. These Upanishads, this collection here, also the Dhammapada of the Buddha, the collected sayings of the Buddha. So I highly recommend him if you're curious about reading these in a really fluid kind of California English. Do you know what I mean? A lot of the English translations of Indian scripture are British from like 100 years ago. And everybody's saying thee and thou, and they sound like Shakespearean actors. So this deals with that problem. They just sound like us talking. So every translator, of course, has a Herculean task, and we won't even get into that. But so in this longer form, somewhat unique Upanishad, this is one of the longer Upanishads So we have a narrative, as most of you probably are familiar with this text, featuring two characters, the spiritual seeker, Nachiketa, a boy. We don't know how old he is, adolescent, teen. It's not in the text. And then the other character is the teacher, the archetypal teacher, Yama, the Lord of Death. And so it's a bit of a mystical journey that our spiritual seeker goes to. So this is often framed as the classic spiritual apprentice text, the archetypal seeker and the archetypal teacher coming together to have their exchange. And there's just packed with information about what that relationship maybe ought to be ultimately. And we'll see that unfold in a moment here as we open it up. Many of you know this as readers of the Upanishads. Most of the others are far shorter, and there aren't really names of who's talking. There's just blocks of discussion between people. So that dialogical structure of the Upanishads is really compelling. As a literary style, it's very compelling. It's very attractive. It's like Plato's dialogues. Plato could have written a bunch of philosophy essays, but instead he writes little plays. He puts his dead teacher Socrates in a room with 3 or 4 or 5 other guys, and they argue about stuff for 30 pages. And it's so engaging to hear different points of view coming from different characters. So you get that dynamic in the Upanishads. It's very lively. So let's see for ourselves what starts to come out of this. So this is one of those sort of maybe overly excited works of art that you find online. A little Marvel comic vibe going on here, but okay, that's Lord Yama looking intense. And there's the spiritual seeker, Nachiketa. So that's fine. I love visual artists and how they bring these stories to life. And one of the questions on this slide is, what must we give up in order to attain wisdom? For many, many years, as I've taught this Upanishad to college students, I skipped the first 5 pages because it's just really this conversation about, well, you'll see, we're going to do it right now. And now I think it's the most important part because it's really key about how we are to ready ourselves. If Nachiketa is the paradigmatic seeker, then maybe we have to pay attention to the transformations or his characteristics, his attributes, because he gets granted entrance into the esoteric inner circle by Lord Yama because of the way he answers these initial questions. Yeah, good stuff. So, here's how it opens up. Once long ago, okay, there's a third character. It's the kid's father, right? But we'll dispense with him quickly. So once long ago, Vajrashravasa gave away his possessions to gain religious merit. He had a son named Nachiketa who, though only a boy, was full of faith in the scriptures. Nachiketa thought when the offerings were made, what merit can one obtain by giving away cows that are too old to give milk? This is a classic adolescent son. Maybe I'm projecting here, but this is a classic adolescent son's criticism of his father. It's like, oh, you're giving away cows that you don't need anymore because they don't give milk to the ashram, to the priests, to get religious merit. Like the worst kind of tithing. And the son is like, I'm up on your hypocrisy, Dad. But he's thinking it to himself. He's, to help his father understand this. I love the softness of that. Instead of, he confronts his father thusly. No, to help his father understand this, he says, to whom will you offer me? He asked this again and again. To death I give you, said his father in anger. So not a great father-son moment. And the son thought, I go. The first of many who will die, in the midst of many who are dying on a mission to Yama, the king of death. So some people wonder, did his father just kill him? Or is this a kind of argument that is figurative? And does he go on a mystical journey? Or is he actually dead? I'll let you decide as we go through the text. So Nachiketa is saying, see how it was with those who came before, how it will be with those who are living. Like corn, mortals ripen and fall. Like corn, they come up again. Nachiketa went to Yama's abode, but the king of death was not there. He waited 3 days, When Yama returned, he heard a voice. So I love this setup. It's the classic three. He goes to Lord Yama's house, knocks on the door, nobody home. He stands on the porch for 3 days. Just like Jonah in the belly of the whale for 3 days, just like Jesus in the tomb for 3 days. It's always 3 days, which, by the way, is how long the moon disappears before it begins to wax again. We see this 3 number all throughout world wisdom literature, so why not? Lord Yama returns home, and Nachiketa hears a voice. When a spiritual guest enters the house like a bright flame, he must be received well with water to wash his feet. Far from wise are those who are not hospitable to such a guest. They will lose all their hopes, their religious merit that they have acquired, their sons, and their cattle. Okay, I guess it's important to be hospitable. And so Lord Yama has not been hospitable. And so this is an embarrassing thing. Lord Yama says, "Oh, spiritual guest, I grant you 3 boons to atone for the 3 inhospitable nights you have spent in my abode. Ask for 3 boons, 1 for each night." Boon, an old, interesting translation decision made by Ikanaghiswaran. It's an old-timey word. 3 wishes, I guess. 3 gifts. 3 things that help you. So ask for 3 gifts. So Lord Yama is upside down here. He's in social debt. He owes, he's been caught blowing it. And out of shame, he's offering these 3 gifts to this kid. So Nachiketa said, "O King of Death, as the first of these 3 boons, grant that my father's anger be appeased so he may recognize me when I return and receive me with love." So I guess, first of all, what a sweet thing to do. It's here's a God giving you 3 wishes. Maybe we all played that game when we were kids. You rub the lamp, the genie comes out. Now I'm switching to Arabic folk tales. And there's the genie giving you 3 wishes. And it's a fun game to play. And the 3rd wish is always infinite wishes, right? Yeah, just to keep it going. Maybe that's just how my friends did it. But in this story, interesting thing to ask. "Oh, can you just calm my dad down so that he won't be mad at me anymore?" Done. Okay. First wish. Second wish. There is no fear at all in heaven, for you are not there. Neither old age nor death, passing beyond hunger and thirst and pain, all rejoice in the kingdom of heaven. You know the fire sacrifice leads to heaven, O King of Death. I have full faith in you and ask for instruction. Let this be your 2nd boon to me. So here's the 2nd wish. Can you explain the meaning of the fire sacrifice? And I got to tell you, when I was a 19-year-old kid reading the Katha Upanishad for the first time in some world religions class, I was unimpressed with Nachiketa's wish strategy. Forgive my dad, and now can you explain the meaning of some ritual that priests do? I'm like, I hope the 3rd one's good, and it is. But so far, I'm a little underwhelmed by Nachiketa's wishing. But actually, from a more serious perspective, this is a really important part of the text, because the fire ritual ends up being an essentially important ritual in this aspect of the Hindu faith. And in fact, it's so important that it actually ends up being named after Nachiketa, and it's one of the rituals in devotional Hinduism that paves the way to realization. So it's not a trivial thing at all, but as an outsider reading it the first time, I just didn't get it, and now I understand a little bit more why it matters. So I'm interjecting my bracketed narrator voice here and skipping some passages in the text. Here, Yama agrees to explain the fire sacrifice, and then the narrator steps in to provide that detailed explanation, and now it's time for the 3rd boon. So it's with bated breath that we turn the page. Okay, what's the 3rd one going to be? Nachiketa says, "When a person dies, there arises this doubt. He still exists, say some. He does not, say others. I want you to teach me the truth. This is my 3rd boon." So we can kind of put that in some different words maybe to make it clearer. Is there life after death? Some people say that when the body dies, consciousness or the soul or whatever you want to call it goes on in some other realm. Other people say, no, when the body dies, it's lights out and that's it. Consciousness is a material event. That sort of atheist, materialist position. So there's just two possibilities, and pretty interesting thing for a kid to ask, a pretty philosophical question, but what a great question. And if you're going to ask anybody, the Lord of Death is a pretty good place to start. So let's watch how Yama navigates this moment. Yama says, this doubt haunted even the gods of old, for the secret of death is hard to know. Typo number 2. The best way to find proofreading errors is to publish. And then finally, they're all right there. Maybe I should project them in my living room or something. Look fine on my computer. Anyway, look at what he's doing. Nachiketa, ask for some other boon and release me from my promise. He's basically saying, no, I do not want to answer your question about what happens after death. Can we do something else? And Nachiketa says, this doubt haunted even the gods of old, for it is hard to know, O death, as you say. I can have no greater teacher than you, and there is no boon equal to this. Yama is stuck, right? He's caught. Yama says, ask for sons and grandsons who will live 100 years. Ask for herds of cattle, elephants and horses, gold and vast land, and ask to live as long as you desire. Or, if you can think of anything more desirable, ask for that. With wealth and long life as well. Nachiketa, be the ruler of a great nation, and I will give you the utmost capacity to enjoy the pleasures of life. Ask for beautiful women of loveliness rarely seen on earth, riding in chariots, skilled in music. Nice touch. To attend on you. But Nachiketa, don't ask me about the secret of death. Is this reminding anybody of anything? The 3 temptations of Christ, where Satan comes to Jesus in the Gospels and says, whisks him to the top of a mountain and says, I will make you king of everything you survey if you bow down to me. And which, by the way, reminds us of the 3 temptations of Buddha, the same thing. The demon Mara comes to Buddha as he's meditating under the Bodhi tree in the forest, about to realize enlightenment and become the awakened one, the Buddha. And the demon comes to him and offers Siddhartha Gautama 3 temptations: pleasure, power, release from suffering. And it's in Joseph Campbell's analysis of the hero's journey. These are threshold guardian moments, where the threshold guardian blocks the way, says you cannot pass here until you answer 3 riddles or somehow navigate a temptation. And so it sounds like Lord Yama's just kind of wimping out. He doesn't want to go through the trouble of explaining the mystery of existence to this boy. But it's also, on another layer, isn't it presenting as a kind of test to this kid? I'm going to give this kid a lottery winner's life and see if he takes that. And I think a lot of us already guess where this is going.
Do you think this is possibly like one of the last stages before enlightenment that all of us may have to go through in some sense? These last temptations?
That's
pull
how
us
it's
into the world, or be
Yeah.
released from the world?
Right. That's how it's setting up. It's almost maybe that Lord Yama is seeing if the boy is ready to really renounce and really let go. And in that state of deep and total renunciation, that exemplifies a readiness for the knowledge he's about to lay on him. And that if he laid all that wisdom on him while he was still conflicted about what his values really were, where he really wanted to be, then then none of the wisdom would have been received from that process. So yeah, I think that's part of what's going on. This is literature, so we get to interpret it from different perspectives like that. So Nachiketa says to Lord Yama, these pleasures, all those things he just laid out, these pleasures last but until tomorrow, and they wear out the vital powers of life. How fleeting is all life on earth. Therefore, keep your horses, keep your chariots, dancing and music for yourself. Never can mortals be made happy by wealth. How can we be desirous of wealth when we see your face, when we see death? And no, we cannot live while you are here. This is the boon I choose and ask you for. Having approached an immortal like you, Nachiketa continues, how can I, subject to old age and death, ever try to rejoice in a long life for the sake of the senses' fleeting pleasures? Dispel this doubt of mine, O King of Death. Does a person live after death or does he not? Nachiketa asks, referring to himself in first person, Nachiketa asks for no other boon than the secret of this great mystery. So he's really holding Lord Yama to his promise. You said 3 boons. Here's the 3rd boon. I'm not going to give up on this one. Yama says, the joy of the spirit ever abides, but not what seems pleasant to the senses. So I'm framing this as, and these titles are just my summation of what we're reading. Nachiketa passes the test, I think, is the point we're at now in the story. And the answer now starts to trickle out. Yama says, the joy of the spirit ever abides, but not what seems pleasant to the senses. Both of these, differing in their purpose, prompt us to action. All is well for those who choose the joy of the spirit, but they, the goal of life, who prefer the pleasant. Perennial joy or passing pleasure, this is the choice one is to make always. Those who are wise recognize this, but not the ignorant. The first welcome what leads to abiding joy, those that love the Spirit. That leads to abiding joy, though painful at the time. The latter run, goaded by their senses after what seems immediate pleasure. Have you renounced these passing pleasures so dear to the senses, Nachiketa, and turned your back on the way of the world that makes mankind forget the goal of life? Those of us who are students of the Bhagavad Gita recognize some of this language from that text, that later text. Again, scholars argue that the Bhagavad Gita was written around the time of Christ, 200 BCE, 200 CE, and inserted into the Mahabharata, the longest epic poem on earth, the story of Krishna and Arjuna. So that's a later text than this, and there's a similar cadence to some of these questions, that the spiritual path is painful at first but leads to abiding joy. The path of sensual pleasure is pleasurable at first but leads to abiding pain. And it's not hard as you look through your life to see that the paths that lead to the deepest, most meaningful, most authentic growth and joy are often painful initially, bitter, but they lead to an abiding sweetness, whereas the immediate sweetness payoff is ephemeral. And we see that happening here. So that is part of this process that this boy is going through with this God. Yama says, far apart are wisdom and ignorance. The first, wisdom, leads one to self-realization or Atman realization. The second, one more and more estranged from one's real self or Atman. I regard you, Nachiketa, as worthy of instruction, for passing pleasures tempt you not at all. Ignorant of their ignorance, yet wise in their own esteem, those deluded men, proud of their own vain learning, go round and round like the blind led by the blind. Far beyond their eyes, hypnotized by the world of sense, opens the way to immortality. I am my body. When my body dies, I die. Living in this superstition, they fall life after life under my sway. So that question I posed earlier, this earliest setup section of the Katha Upanishad, where this boy, I think the easiest way to frame it is, this boy passes the spiritual test that Lord Yama gave. I'm going to offer this kid all the money and sex and power and wealth and pleasure in the world. Let's see if he falls for that. He does not fall for that. Oh, okay. Then he is now ready for the inner teaching or esoteric teaching. So now we're at a threshold in the story, because here we are, a guy like me, an interested person in this text, not someone who has, a householder with a mortgage and a marriage and a retirement fund and a swimming pool in my backyard. Not exactly a spiritual aspirant, but deeply connected to these questions and in my own way, as a householder, in love with all of these questions and these processes. But I feel like I'm going somewhere I'm not supposed to go right now, because this clear setup says that only those who have attained a kind of austerity, and this is a rich discussion in Hinduism, isn't it? Do you have to throw it all away? Or do you have to be an ascetic? Or can one, in a householder life, in a nice car where the air conditioning works, can you still call yourself a spiritual seeker, a spiritual aspirant? And that's a really personal question. But I think one of the things that drew me to Hinduism early on is that the question gets answered in a really beautiful way, that all paths lead to the summit, as Ramakrishna famously said, and that the path you're on right now is exactly, absolutely the right one, and not to sit around and kind of agonize about not being good enough to read the rest of the Katha Upanishad. So why don't we just go forge ahead and read the dangerous parts. I promise no one will burst into flames. I think those that set this up as a hard barrier are in my assessment, being a little excessive. And for that, I turn to the Gita, and Krishna is so beautifully, lovingly clear about this, that that extreme asceticism, and Buddha too, right? Extreme asceticism is just as futile as extreme sensual indulgence. And from the Buddha, we get the idea of the middle path as the most effective way. So with all that kind of framing, let's just get to it. So Yama says, it is but few who hear about the self, the Atman, the undying universal consciousness. Fewer still dedicate their lives to its realization. Wonderful is the one who speaks about the self. Rare are they who makes it the supreme goal of their lives. Blessed are they who, through an illumined teacher, attain to self-realization. Now we're going to have to think about the teacher-student dynamic a little bit. And clearly we know who these two characters are, but what about us? So the truth of the Atman, I'll just probably say Atman every time I see the word self. The truth of the Atman cannot come through one, I left a word out, cannot come through one who has not realized that he is the Atman. So you're not going to get it in a college class. You're not going to get it in this session here today. We can think about it, talk about it, approach it, frame it, remember it, work on it. But the realization of Atman cannot come through anyone who has not realized it themselves. The intellect cannot reveal the Atman beyond its duality of subject and object. There's so much in every sentence, right? The mind, the intellect needs the subjective and the objective. So there's a duality always built in, the knower and the known. And in realization, all dualities are transcended. And there is simply becoming and not knowing. So there's a few things in the way, and a lot of them are right here in our own cognitive processes. So those who see themselves in all and all in them help others through spiritual osmosis to realize the Atman themselves. So there's in that third sentence of that paragraph, seeing oneness is evidence of a realized consciousness, that everyone is my neighbor, that there are no hierarchies. Those folks have a better shot at transmitting the insight, but not through intellect, not through words, not through lectures, books, and teachings. How? Spiritual osmosis. I'd love to know what the Sanskrit here is, but Iknatheswaran is drawing from biology, the concept of osmosis. And some of us remember our biology classes, me not so much, but I looked it up, and osmosis is a word in biology for when the substance in one cell moves through the semi-permeable membrane of that cell and passes through the semi-permeable membrane of another cell and becomes part of the substance of that cell. So in a shorter sentence, in spiritual osmosis, something of the essence of the teacher enters you and becomes part of your essence. It doesn't come through words or understanding concepts or writing essays. Back in the 70s, we called it stuff like vibes. and I'm thinking of the Maya Angelou line. I'm going to paraphrase when she said, people will never remember what you said. They never remember what you did, but people never forget the way you made them feel. And I think back on my favorite teachers, and I invite you to think back over your life. And I'm thinking of Miss Gilbert in 4th grade and a few others, and Barrett Colmback, my philosophy professor at Ventura College, my first philosophy professor. I couldn't tell you one thing those teachers said. I couldn't tell you one thing they wrote on the board. I couldn't tell you one assignment. But I remember how I felt in their presence. And I'm just bringing that lived experience to maybe spark a memory of yours that brings to life this curious biological metaphor of spiritual osmosis. Maybe that's how wisdom of realization moves. So this awakening you have known, Yama says, comes not through logic or scholarship, but from close association with a realized teacher. Wise are you, Nachiketa, because you seek the Atman eternal. May we have more seekers like you. So now the teacher is heaping praise on the student, and it's time for them to really get down into the teachings. Yama says, I spread before your eyes, not Nachiketa, the fulfillment of all worldly desires, power to dominate the earth, delight celestial gained through religious rites, miraculous powers beyond time and space. These with will and wisdom you have renounced. So renunciation is the trigger here in this Upanishad, and frankly throughout the Upanishads. Renunciation simply in English means letting go. Letting things drop. Letting go of the illusion that I'm in control. Letting go the illusion that all my desires are actually good for me, and all of those other things. So it's a state of deep surrender and deep release. And so now Lord Yama begins to teach. And for the next 15 pages, and we won't read every word of it because we don't have all day, but I've picked a few more passages I want to study with you. For the next 15 pages, Yama deftly teaches Nachiketa, and of course by extension all of us as we listen in, about the nature of ultimate reality and our inextricable oneness with it, thereby reframing the whole issue of personal mortality. Don't forget the initial question, is there life after death? And Lord Yama doesn't really give a thumbs up, thumbs down on that. He takes the boy on a different kind of journey. And we'll see that the question does get answered, but in a circuitous, surprising way. And most of us here in this space, which I suspect are students of Vedanta, already know how that is framed. So forgive me though if you're new to this tradition, just 3 vocabulary terms. Brahman is the name of the indivisible ultimate reality, what in the Abrahamic faiths gets called God and is personified as a being. But in Vedanta, Brahman is not one of the many thousands of gods. It is imageless, formless. It is the sacred, formless ground of being from which all forms emerge and to which all forms return, all the while retaining their unity with it. So Brahman is the name of the oneness of all consciousness, all energy, all being, all of this. If any of it seems separate, that's because of Maya. And Atman is, as we've heard many times in the text, translated in English by Iswaran as capital S, self. It isn't your personal identity, it is the one universal consciousness that arises as all of us. And Atman and Brahman are the same thing. Two words for the same thing. And then Maya is, of course, the problem. Maya meaning briefly illusion. It's the illusory realm of both sense perception, the five senses, and also all of the cognitive concepts that we form, our so-called ordinary thinking, our conceptual thought that we form based on those five data streams coming in to the mind. Maya gives us this beautiful three-dimensional, delightful, delicious, terrifying world, but it also hides from us like a veil the unitive reality of Brahman, Atman. Therefore, in the whole big Hindu picture, all of the yogas, the margas, are methods for piercing the veil of Maya and not going from here to there, but realizing our ongoing oneness. It is recovered, it is brought out of the subconscious, you could say, by yoga, by spiritual practice. So Yama goes on to say to the boy, the wise, realizing through meditation the timeless Atman, beyond all perception, hidden in the cave of the heart, leave pain and pleasure far behind. Those who know they are neither body nor mind, but the immemorial Atman, the divine principle of existence, Brahman, find the source of all joy and live in joy abiding. I see the gates of joy are opening for you, Nachiketa. There's a roundabout way of answering his question. It's not a yes or no to is there life after death, but in a way, what we already essentially are is birthless and deathless. It's mistaken even to think that there is such a thing as birth, life, and death. The wonderful contemporary teacher, non-duality teacher, Eckhart Tolle, in his little tiny book, Stillness Speaks, has this wonderful line. He says, life is not the opposite of death. The opposite of death is birth. Life has no opposite. And so Eckhart Tolle teaches Vedanta and Zen Buddhism without any reference to those traditions in plain English, translated out of his original German. So there the word life has no opposite. Life is Tolle's representation of Brahman, the birthless, deathless ground of being that we are. Only we don't know it because Maya cuts that realization out. I will give you the word. All the scriptures glorify, all spiritual disciplines express, to attain which aspirants lead a life of self-restraint and self-knotting. It is home. This symbol of the Godhead is the highest. Realizing it, one finds complete fulfillment of all one's longings. It is one of the greatest support to all seekers. When Om reverberates unceasingly within the heart, that one is indeed blessed and deeply loved as the one who is the Atman. So there's the connection to that famous part of Hindu practice and observation. The all-knowing Atman was never born, will never die. Boy, that line shows up in the Bhagavad Gita, doesn't it, in chapter 2. Krishna, Arjuna's freaking out about this war that's about to happen in chapter 1. Chapter 2, the spiritual teacher in that book, Krishna says to Arjuna, look around at all these kings. There was never a time when you did not exist, nor will there ever be a time when you cease to exist. Now speaking as Lord Krishna, he says, I have already slain all of these kings. And that idea of having one foot in the knowledge of immortality in both directions and the other foot in, well, yeah, but I have to maintain this body for a few years and keep this alive too. So which is it? Well, it's both and always. It's not either or. Hidden in the heart of every creature exists the Atman, subtler than the subtlest, greater than the greatest. They go beyond all sorrow. Boy, this is a mess. I'm just, this creates engaged reading, to pepper your text with typos, and people are like, you can't just like sleepwalk through this. Y'all have to read it with me. Look for the next typo. It's a game. They go beyond all sorry, who extinguish their self-will, and behold the glory of the Atman through the grace of the Lord of love. Oh, here's a new phrase, the Lord of love. So now we're getting a kind of theistic, a God portrait, but the personification of love, with no explanation or definition in the text. When the wise realize the Atman, formless in the midst of forms, changeless in the midst of change, omnipresent and supreme, they go beyond sorrow. So is he answering the boy's question? We have a ways to go, but is he answering the boy's question or not? He kind of is, while taking him into a much bigger understanding. I mean, the answer, I guess, is yeah, there's existence after death. It's just not quite what you think it is. When Peter Bolland, I can't help but think about it this all. I just officiated a memorial service yesterday up at Miramar National Cemetery, a beautiful military funeral with all the military ritual and the snapping and presentation of the flag and the presentation to the widow and the guy on trumpet 40 feet away playing taps. It is moving. And you can't help but escape this question. We are all dealing with death constantly with our elders and so on. This is far from academic. The self cannot be known through the study of scriptures. I guess we've covered that ground already, nor through the intellect, nor through hearing discourses about it. The Atman can be attained only by those whom the Atman chooses. Oh, now there's an interesting wrinkle here. That our job, like Nachiketa, is not to hunt it down and drag it back to our house, but to make ourselves empty enough to receive it, to prepare the soil for the seeds to fall into, and then just wait. It is our readiness that facilitates the sacred connection. And that sounds a lot like the way Paul describes faith in the New Testament, if you're interested in the Christian tradition. He describes faith not as believing in things for which there is no evidence, but faith as a kind of renunciation, as a kind of emptying, as a kind of state of readiness, and frankly, as a state of not knowing. That certainty is the enemy of faith. And I know we're all used to religious people, some of them, the loudest ones anyway, being very certain about a lot of things and demanding that we agree with them. But as the Episcopalian Bishop John Shelby Spong put it, Christianity is like the community pool. All of the noise is coming from the shallow end. I love it when bishops and priests throw shade like that. That is an interesting thing. So real faith means not knowing. Real readiness for Atman realization means coming out of my conceptual palace that I built with all of my definitions and scholarship. That's why you're usually going to learn more about wisdom with a quick chat with your neighbor over your backyard fence than you are from a philosophy professor. I hate to say it, but yeah. So the Atman cannot be known by anyone who desires not from who desists not from unrighteous ways, controls not the senses, stills not the mind, and practices not meditation. Okay, there's more specific content about preparing, and that is probably reasonable. None else can know the omnipresent Atman, whose glory sweeps away the rituals of the priest, and prowess of the warrior, and puts death itself to death. So there is, in one of the seditious, delicious things about Vedanta is you occasionally run into Vedanta voices throwing a little shade on the devotional ritual folks. Not to dismiss the value of devotional ritual and worship, but to say, if you anchor and attach too closely to the ideology that you are nothing without this God or goddess, then the deeper journey that Vedanta and Hinduism invites us on, that path is not being taken. It becomes another form of ritual attachment. That's pretty subtle and challenging to hear. Here's a nice portrait that comes up a few times. In the secret cave of the heart, two are seated by life's fountain. The separate ego drinks of the sweet and bitter stuff, liking the sweet, disliking the bitter, while the supreme Atman drinks sweet and bitter, neither liking this nor disliking that. The ego gropes in darkness while the Atman lives in light. So declare the illumined sages and householders, thank you, who drove here in a car, you're a householder, who worship the sacred fire in the name of the Lord. So that, just be cautious, it seems to me, in spiritual literature when the teacher starts talking about dichotomies, hard binaries. Jesus does this a lot too. Sometimes it's a little hard to get past, so does Paul. You're either with us or you're against us, that kind of stuff. And I think those are pedagogical techniques to make quick contrasts in an oratory setting. Remember, this is all to be recited. These aren't texts originally. These are sung and recited. And so just setting out some caution there. May we light the fire of Nashiketa that burns out the ego and enables us to pass from fearful fragmentation to fearless fullness in the changeless whole. I'm running a little long. I know we started a little late, but maybe we don't have time to go through all of my slides because I want to leave time for a dialogue as well. So let me just go maybe five more minutes, and then we'll just pause it there and go on. I'll make this remark as well. Anybody here or watching on Zoom live right now, or any dear people of the future watching this on YouTube, God knows when, all of you, if any of you would like this PowerPoint presentation, I'd be happy to email it to you. All you have to do is go to my website, which is my name, peterbolland.com, and there's a contact button there. Hit that and say, hey, can I have the Katha Upanishad slides? And I will send them to you so you can go through all of these and have them in your device. So I forgot to say that at the top. So this is such a rich part, though, and I think it has deep connections to Western philosophy as well. So this is known as that section of the Katha Upanishad called the chariot analogy. So know the Atman as the Lord of the chariot. I'm going to give you a visual in a moment, but try and build the visual right now. So imagine an Indian chariot. So there's two people in the chariot. There's a bunch of horses pulling the chariot. Chariot is a two-wheeled wagon. And so he's going to make a really sophisticated analogy of the chariot as the human being. The Atman as the Lord of the chariot, the body as the chariot itself, and the discerning intellect as the charioteer. Okay, so the chariot is your body. The Atman is the Lord, I guess, the ruler of the chariot, but then there's this other person who is your intellect who is driving the chariot. And the mind, which is a part of the guy driving the chariot, is the reins that are connected to all the horses. And the senses, say the wise, are the horses. So 5 or 6 horses, 6 senses, 5 senses. In India, we often talk about 6. Either way. And selfish desires are the roads they travel on. You got it? It's a complicated analogy. And when Atman is confused with the body, mind, and senses, these voices point out, he seems to enjoy pleasures and suffer sorrow. When a person lacks discrimination and his mind is undisciplined, the senses run hither and thither like wild horses, but they obey the rein like trained horses when one has discrimination and has made the mind one-pointed. Some Western scholars speculate that Plato may have heard this story because there's an analogy in a Platonic dialogue called the Phaedrus that is similar. In Plato's analogy, there's only one person driving the chariot and 3 horses, and he's doing the 3 parts of the soul, the rational, the spirited, and the appetitive, from which Freud will later get the superego, the ego, and the id. So there are all these kinds of threads between these traditions. Look, it's just ancient people trying to do what we today call cognitive science or psychology. What is consciousness? What are the different parts of my mind? How does memory and desire impact volition or decision making? And that's a pretty modern thing. In philosophy, we call it philosophy of mind, philosophy of consciousness. It's a really hot research topic today. And so here is a really beautiful literary take, and here's someone's visual, and you have all the definitions across the top there. So again, the passenger, the ruler, is the higher self, and then the driver is the intellect, and the mind are the reins, and then there's some other detailed analysis there from Indian psychology. The horses are the senses. They each have so they count the brain as one of the senses from left to right. I guess taste, touch, smell, hearing, vision, and then the brain itself as the place where all of those senses are organized, constituting, I guess, another sense organ in a way. So I got that off Google. So those who lack discrimination, Yama says, with little control over their thoughts are far from pure. Reach not the pure state of immortality, but wander from death to death. But those who have discrimination with a still mind and a pure heart reach journey's end, never again to fall into the jaws of death. We're talking about reincarnation all of a sudden now, and the cycle of rebirth. So with the discriminating intellect as charioteer and a trained mind as reins, they attain the supreme goal of life, to be united with the Lord of love. The senses derive from objects of sense perception, sense objects from mind, mind from intellect, and intellect from ego, ego from undifferentiated consciousness, and consciousness from Brahman. I'm going to need 2,000 words on that last piece by Monday from all the people here. No, I'm not assigning any homework today, but that's a very complicated piece. So just to finishing out the chariot piece, and then we'll pause. Brahman is the first cause and the last refuge. Brahman, the hidden Atman in everyone, does not shine forth. He is revealed only to those who keep their minds one-pointed on the Lord of love and thus develop a superconscious manner of knowing. Meditation enables them to go deeper and deeper into consciousness, from the world of words to the world of thoughts, then beyond thoughts to wisdom in the Atman. Get up, wake up, seek the guidance of an illumined teacher, and realize the Atman. Sharp like a razor's edge, the sages say, is the path, difficult to traverse. The supreme Atman is beyond name and form, beyond the senses, inexhaustible, without beginning, without end, without time, beyond time, space, and causality, eternal, immutable. Maybe you recognize the razor's edge phrase. The European novelist Somerset Maugham wrote a book called The Razor's Edge. It's a very famous old movie, and there's one from the 80s starring Bill Murray. And so that becomes one of those wonderful spiritual images, that the path is as thin as a razor's edge. It's very easy to fall off to the right or fall off to the left. It's a little difficult to stay there. All this discernment is required. When Jesus frames his visual image of the path to righteousness, to the kingdom of heaven, he says, narrow is the gate to righteousness and wide is the path to unrighteousness. So there's a more kind of agrarian image. You're walking across a field and there's a narrow gate, and it's easy to miss it this way or that. Just as the old English word in sticking with the Christian tradition for a second, our English word sin comes from, as some of you know, the old English word sin, S-Y-N-N, which apparently is an archery term meaning to miss the mark. So when the arrow falls into the dirt and doesn't even hit the target. So there's another spatial image that, hitting the bullseye of spiritual illumination, or in Christian terms, righteousness, entering the kingdom of heaven, even though the word sin does not, of course, exist in Hebrew or English, and that's a whole translation footnote. We are well beyond the scope of our work today. the word that Jesus used for sin really mostly means, it's a financial term, means when you owe somebody money. So when Jesus was talking about sin, he was talking about a debt unpaid. And then when the gospel writers and Paul, who write in Greek, render Jesus's Aramaic word in Greek as hamartia, which means now sin means an eternal flaw, not just a mistake you made or a debt you need to set right, but a brokenness inside of you, an eternal flaw that you can't repair yourself. So I'm just offering those insights into the difficulty of translating wisdom texts that are thousands of years old without losing whatever the heck it was the original teachers were even trying to teach. And that's another piece of evidence for me to always stay humble about my so-called certainty about the conclusions I draw from these teachings, and to always stay in that humility, to always stay in that student state. So just to show you how many slides I typed, way too many. So let me just get to this one here, and leave that up and pause, because I would love to now invite a conversation. We have some time set aside for that, and we have a microphone. So if you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. The microphone is the purpose of that is twofold. We want to honor those in the room that are a little hard of hearing. And I know in every gathering like this, someone always says, I don't need a microphone. And that's pretty ableist, because there are people in this room who are not going to hear a word of what you say. So I would like you to overcome your shyness and hold that mic nice and close to you. Secondly, the people on Zoom and all the souls of the future who will watch this on YouTube, they would like to hear your comment too. Now no one's going to talk, and I set it up like that. It's a difficult thing. So let's just chat, and we'll run a mic around to you. Who wants to start us off? Did Lord Yama answer the boy's question, or what other question is on your mind?
Raise your hand if you'd like to.
I have one question.
Oh, please.
Okay. As you were
No fair, you already
explaining-
have a microphone. That's so unfair.
As you were explaining, I was identifying the similarities that Katha Upanishad has with Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
So my question is, which came first? Probably Bhagavad Gita did. So whoever wrote, or whoever, I guess Upanishads are here, they hear these words, these are seers. So I don't know if that person was inspired by Bhagavad Gita, or is it just the same thing repeated again,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm just curious as to how.
I am too. That's a great question about the timeline of all this. So it's just, to put it in very crude terms, it's just a big mess. Trying to figure out what text comes first. And so a couple things come to mind. You could look it up on Wikipedia and Google and all those places, and you would read that there is a scholarly consensus among those who make it their life's work to study these things, that the Upanishads were written, and that's a key word because they may have existed as oral traditions long before, but we seem to be able to date the texts to, again, a big period, what that I'm calling the first millennium, I guess, the first millennium BCE, before Christ. So it could be as old as 1000 BCE, 900, 800, 700. That seems to be the general perspective. And there's a lot of, we could get into detail about the evidence they use to make those claims, but letting that stand for now. Secondly, the Bhagavad Gita is dated by this same scholarly consensus as later than that. So most folks think the Gita came right around the time of Jesus. So at the end of, right at the beginning of the first millennium CE or AD. So that makes the Gita the one that is kind of shaped by the earlier Upanishads. But your question really opens it up in a beautiful way. Namely, these are conversations that everybody is having. And so it's not necessarily the case that whoever wrote the Bhagavad Gita had a copy of the Katha Upanishad on his desk. It might not be that direct. But these turns of phrase, because you pointed it out, that this is coming from seers who are working in an oral tradition, who are hearing a lot of these things. Is that?
Yes, I agree with you, because I also read this, that Bhagavad Gita is often compared that the Upanishads are the milk and the Bhagavad Gita is the cream made from all, so.
Stealing that, really good, really good. Yeah, and let's throw Buddhism in the mix, right? Because we know that Buddha lived 500-600, right in the middle of the Upanishad period, right in the middle of that first millennium BCE. And so Buddha, the guy who we come to know as the Buddha, comes out of the Hindu tradition, and he is in the forest studying with these gurus who are writing the Upanishads, essentially. And so he comes right up in that system of inquiry, of dialogue, much of what we just got a really good taste of. And so the teachings of the Buddha are neither an affirmation nor denial of Hinduism. Buddha doesn't seem very interested in distancing himself from anything Hindu, but he simply narrows his project on meditation and realization and the methodology of meditation and his own teachings as the Four Noble Truths and so on. But he is, in today's India, Siddhartha Gautama of the Shakyamuni clan, the Shakyamuni Buddha, is just considered one of the many darshanas or teachings of the Hindu system. A heterodox darshana, as we say in academic circles, meaning a kind of outside, more of not the orthodox darshanas like Vedanta, but nevertheless one of the many ways of expressing a flowering of the Vedanta impulse in a slightly different way. But dating text is always dicey. One last thought on that, and then we'll open it back up. On my YouTube channel, I have a 5-part series on the Katha Upanishad, or is it 3-part? Anyway, if you wanted to go through it more thoroughly on your phone some night, you could. But I bring that up because something surprising happened. I made a bunch of these little mini lecture videos for my college students when COVID happened. And I didn't know how to teach online, but I suddenly had to become an online teacher for a few years there while we were all on lockdown. And so I made over 100 little 20-minute videos about stuff like this and put them on this YouTube channel. I'm like, well, and I just link them in my online classes. And then that was, 5-6 years ago. And I've got over 15,000 subscribers now and over 500,000 views. And about 40% of the viewers of these videos are in India. And I get all kinds of beautiful messages from people in India. Thank you for, putting your Western spin on these things. I'm growing up here in India and we don't learn any of this in school. We're all learning coding and engineering and physics, and we're all marketing. We're all marketing majors in college. And this is not my statement about India. This is an anecdotal thing a guy said to me. Don't take that too literally, but his experience was that I have trouble in India finding teachers who are teaching this stuff, which is frustrating to me. But I bring that up because what I also have happening on my YouTube channel is a lot of argument about some of the claims that you and I were just discussing. The Gita wasn't written around the time of Christ. That's Western garbage. That's imperialist colonial distortion. The Gita is 2,000 years old, and so on and so on. Same with all the dating of the Upanishads and all the dating of the Vedas. So there is a kind of nationalist Indian scholarship movement that is throwing off what they see as the distortions of the colonial age. When a bunch of British scholars for 100 years told the world about Indian philosophy. And we all see the problem with that, when the colonizers are the interpreters of the tradition. And a lot of Indian scholars are coming up now and saying, wait a minute, That's not exactly how it happened. That's not how that migration happened. That's not when these texts were written. So it's beautifully messy is where I started. And I have my ears open on all of it, and it's just a fascinating thing to watch people try to work this stuff out. So, okay, I've said too much about that, but thank you for that question. Please, and can we get a microphone around? Thank you. And then we'll come to you next.
Yeah, I had a couple questions. I'll start with the easy one first. Thank you very much for the enlightening talk.
Oh, I appreciate it.
I recall a former philosophy professor told me that the Bible assumes God's existence. So beyond the scriptures, what basis do you have for a belief in the Brahman? That's my first question. The easy one.
Do I have?
You have?
Yeah, or can be had, or whatever, I understand.
However you want to take it.
Yeah. Well, what strikes me about, from the very beginning when I fell in love with these traditions to now all these decades later, the question of belief doesn't really come up much. Do you believe in Brahman or do you not believe in Brahman? In the Vedanta tradition, it seems to be about experiencing Brahman. And, because belief has to do with the mind again. And whether one believes in God or believes there is no God, that's just an on-off switch between two competing concepts. And what I keep feeling myself drawn toward in this Vedanta project is all of that conceptual stuff is fascinating, but that's different from realizing, is the word they use in these translations, or experiencing the depth. And so it is, as we were maybe hinting at before, it is maybe what Paul means by faith in his own journey as a Pharisaic Jew in the Jesus movement in the first century, writing letters before the Gospels were even written, right? Paul's working in the dark here. He's riding on donkey from house to house in these different towns around the Mediterranean. There's no such thing as Christianity in Paul's world. There's this Jesus movement, and there's no written text yet. And so Paul's working with mostly Jews who are in love with this particular rabbinical movement around this teacher who got executed called Jesus. So there's no texts to argue about. There's just the experience of love that happens when people get into a room and they commit their life to living lovingly, non-violently, non-judgmentally, and in conscious contact with some kind of transcendence. And so that's more than just intellectually offering one's agreement to a proposition. Yes, there is a God. I believe in God. And more a question of, an agnostic experience. One can experience something without hammering it into knowledge propositions. So to me, it's good to get closer to your question, because I'm far afield now, but to get closer to it, what we often, because Paul uses the word belief all the time, to again, counter-reference that one tradition. And in Vedanta, I don't hear anybody asking me to believe in anything. And to me, that was important. Because I didn't grow up in a Christian home. Again, more autobiography you don't need, but I didn't come from a religious background. I fell in love with all this stuff in college, and I didn't take too well to people telling me I had to believe something that I had no experience of, because it says so in this old book. I'm like, and that's why this tradition and Taoism and Buddhism opened up to me right away. And they ended up being paths later, and now I have a much friendly attitude toward Christianity and all the rest because of my work here. So,
Well, just as a follow-up, it
Yeah.
seems as if the experience is not the experiencer. So you can highlight the experience, but that's unlike or apart from the experiencer as Brahman. But that's just a side note, which I'm going to be thinking about. But other than that, I wanted to ask about the so-called wisdom of the Upanishad.
You're right.
There seems to be some gaps in this wisdom scripture, because there doesn't seem to be any middle path here.
Yeah.
And you're either on one side or the other side.
Yeah.
And even Yama, with all that intellectualizing, with his student didn't really explain to him the procedure.
Correct. No, there's a lot missing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and we only read about half of it, and we only had an hour to do this. So this is a thumbnail sketch.
Yeah.
And you're right to point all those additional questions that need investigation.
So I could do all the preparation for enlightenment I want to, but if the self doesn't choose me,
Yeah.
doesn't love me enough,
What a way to put it on Valentine's Day.
then
I
I'm
know.
done
Needy
until
much,
someone else
yeah, I
does,
know.
until one of the monastics attain it.
Yeah. Well, again, what we get when we encounter a teaching session like we are invited into is, you don't go to therapy one time and say, psychotherapy is stupid. And so there is a beginning of a lifelong process. And this is one of the many windows that we can peer through into a house of many rooms. So yeah, you're not wrong at all to point out that, boy, I need some more clarity about method. I need some more detail. I think you're right. It's ironic that the message is Brahmanatman, or the realization or the experience of ultimacy, is beyond thought, beyond concepts, beyond words, but now let me write a big book about it. And let me talk to you forever about it. So we are humans. We use language, we use conceptual thought, we put our thoughts on paper, we study thoughts written down thousands of years ago. These are all means to an end. As Alan Watts said, the menu is not the food. And I think what you're expressing is, it's a little frustrating to read the menu. I'm still hungry. And that's exactly Alan Watts's point. You don't go into a restaurant hungry, read a menu and go, okay, that was delicious.
I'm more hungry.
Yeah, now I'm more hungry, right? Exactly. Or another one Alan Watts uses is, the map is not the place. You don't put a map of Hawaii around your head, or in our case, beautiful descriptions of realization around your head and go, oh, I'm in Hawaii now, this is amazing. That's confusing the referent with that to which it refers. And so it's important to have this conversation, because texts and teachings can be so important, but they do not contain the realization. And one final response to your remarks, you made the distinction between when you experience something, there is the experiencer, and then there is the experience. And that is correct to point that out, that there is baked into that a kind of dualism again. But in the Indian tradition, we do have descriptions and visions of, for example, in Ashtanga yoga, the 8-limbed yoga, the last of the 8 stages is samadhi, which means the complete disappearance into the Godhead, so that there is no subject and object. There's no one having the experience, there's just the experience. And that's an important window into maybe how we can talk about this slightly more accurately, because the language always kind of misleads us a little bit. Yeah. And we had a question up here, please. Can we pass that mic over? Yes. Thank you, everyone. It's wonderful. Please.
Actually, it kind of relates to what we were talking about in the previous question, but there's a verse, I immediately got reminded of a verse from the Viveka Chudamani. I think it's verse 62. It says, a disease does not leave off if one simply utter the name of the medicine without taking it. Similarly, without direct realization, one cannot be liberated by the mere utterance of the word Brahman. So, yes, I was actually going to ask about that, but then it kind of got sort of answered, which was really interesting. But yeah, and I just wonder if that's complements. I mean, it's a later text, but I wonder if it complements the Katha Upanishad, or it is antithetical to it in some ways. And I was wondering what you thought.
What do you think? Does it fit pretty well?
Well, I mean, he did say that attachment to ritual is. So I'm thinking more about it in relation to ritual, when you take the medicine, it's in what practical way, right?
Yeah.
But then it's when you get attached to it, then that's considered also not being on the right path. So I'm just kind of wondering, I might have to think about it a little bit more.
I'm with you. I'm feeling my way through this too. There's a mixed message, maybe we could put it that way, in this Katha Upanishad and throughout Vedanta scripture, and frankly everywhere else. You're perfect just the way you are, but change. And that's really what a lot of spiritual work is like. When, you are Brahman Atman right now, and it's like, I don't have to do anything. I just have to shut up, sit down, and know that, and realize that. Not one of my steps leads away from God realization. How could it? If everything is identical to Brahman Atman, if that is the inner self of me, then why do I have to go through all this work? Well, it's got to be some kind of middle path between those things. To not enter into our spiritual practice from a place of self-loathing, of I have to leave here and get over there where the enlightened ones are. And that's another attachment disorder that we must release. So I find that in my spiritual life, which is all over the place, as you can imagine, and borrowing practices from all kinds of things, and I know I'm in a room full of folks doing that same kind of thing in your way. We are living in that question of being present with that timeless, birthless, deathless divinity that I am, while also realizing, there's some stuff in the way that I could let go of. And here are some beautiful practices that will humble me. And some of those are rituals. Some of those are just singing together. Some of those are just everybody bring a dish and let's just sit around and eat. That in the Christian tradition, it is the table where we eat that becomes the central icon of the whole faith. When you attend a formal religious service, the table is set for you with the body and the blood, with the bread and the wine. It's always about the table and gathering around the table and making the table long enough for everybody and so on. The metaphor just never ends. And in Vedanta, there are similar multiple paths that give us an opportunity as you discern, right, in where the disease is most acute, where the hindrances are. And so spiritual life then is not about adding a bunch of stuff in, it's about subtraction. And what can I let go of? What old habit is interfering with my serenity? Meister Eckhart, the great Roman Catholic Christian mystic, German priest, the 14th century, puts it exactly that way. Talking to other Christians about God, he says that we come to know God not by a process of addition, but through a process of subtraction. And so now I ask myself, what in my life, and here comes Lent, it starts on Wednesday for those who practice, what can I let go of? What practices, what ways of speaking, what unconscious habits of thinking, or like literally, alcohol or whatever it is that's really interfering with our joy, what can I just put down for 6 weeks? Or what spiritual practices can I take on for 6 weeks? So there's a ritual from the Christian universe, and there are lots of rituals like that in all the branches of Hinduism, of some moderate austerities, just to make sure that we're not eating and drinking blindly and unconsciously, and abstaining from meat. There's just all kinds of things that are rituals, and like Joseph Campbell said, a ritual is a reenactment of a myth, a reenactment of a mythos. That is to say, let's bring philosophy out of the mind and put it in our body. To walk a labyrinth, to go to attend the puja before the lecture on Saturday morning, to sing the sacred songs in a room full of the icons and statues of the gods and goddesses that are always with us, that represent the eternal in these story forms, in these personified forms. Some people draw much nourishment from that. So boy, that is such a great question of somehow always having to adjust the steering wheel a little bit this way, a little bit that way. Today I need a little more ritual. Maybe I'm getting too stuck to the ritual, and so on. And that's where the discernment comes in. It's a beautiful thing. Wonderful. Any other thoughts, questions? We have a question in the back, please.
So let's make this the final question, and then we can take a little break here, 'cause
Okay.
I know some people may have
Closing
to-
song maybe? A closing song maybe?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Please pray.
And please.
Okay, I think this all goes together with the conversation that
Wonderful.
we've been having now. Is just it caught my attention too that the tension between worship and experience, and that kind of inward and outward movement. You know, thinking of my own tradition, like Christian mysticism, and that journeying, you know, for a while, and then having that ritual ground us, but that not become what defines us, and that going back and forth with experience. And I think Jesus, and as we entered into Lent too, kind of had that same thing. It's not about belief, it's about following the way, you know. And so I was just really curious to hear through this story that same, the wisdom isn't the same. I don't know if I have a question in that, but it just was very intriguing to me to see that come over and over to the forefront.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I'm struck by that too, and I've gotten more interested in the Christian tradition in the last 10 years, finally, after kind of keeping it at arm's length my whole life. And it is through the Christian mystics, frankly, and Meister Eckhart and Hildegard of Bingen and St. Teresa of Avila, right on up to Thomas Merton and so many other voices today, like Father Richard Rohr, Franciscan friar out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, that a lot of us get his daily newsletters. And, you know, these are the seditious, progressive universalists in the Christian world who argue that Christianity is not the exclusive faith. It's one among many, and they all work and all that stuff. And so that made Christianity more approachable for me. And so I got baptized 5 years ago.
Nice.
At St. Paul's Episcopal Cathedral right down the road here in Bankers Hill. And that was a remarkable thing. I am an agnostic Christian, I guess. I sit in those pews alongside all the other Christians. I don't know about the virgin birth and if Jesus rose from the grave. I'm not going to give you an answer on all that stuff. But I experienced something in those spaces, in that incense in the glass. It's the same thing I get here. It's the same thing I get walking through the lagunas. But as a white Northern European guy, something happened to me inside those 500-year-old Gothic cathedrals. You know, I kind of found my people. And all those 15th century songs and those big pipe organs, you know, I just dig it. But I was at a Kumeyaay ceremony last week, you know, with the talking stick and the circle, and we're all weeping, and I'm like, I can't get away from this God thing. It's like everywhere I go, you know. So that is a beautiful way to live, I think, and so I don't worry too much about what room I'm in. It's that experience again, and I'm so grateful for all the teachers I've met. You know, the closer you get to a tradition, the more kaleidoscopic it becomes. And the more varied it becomes. You think it's one thing when it's way over there, and like, well, that's not for me. And you get up to it, and you kind of invite yourself into their experience, and you're like, oh man, there's a lot of gold here. There's a lot of beauty. This is some real stuff happening. So I'm just so grateful for that. So that's along the lines of what you were sharing. Thank you, Swami. Do you want to do a prayer and then I'll sing, or how do you?
Just along the lines of maybe just if you get in 1 minute, you can touch on this. You've been talking about the self. You've been talking about Brahman. So, and now we just talked about Christianity a little bit. Can you bridge this for me? The experience of Brahman in Christianity.
Oh, in 1 minute.
Yeah,
Or less.
maybe you can just spread a little bit of a teaser, and we can have. I want to let people have a chance to get a break and feel.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
we can come back to this.
Okay.
But just where is it? Because this is something that we've talked about, the personal aspect of the divine.
Yeah.
Okay, but the impersonal aspect, which is the self, which is Atman, which is Brahman here, where is that within the Christian tradition?
Right, good. So, as we were going through the text today in our brief study of about half of the Katha Upanishad, you see even Lord Yama, who's like, you know, he's part of the management class, you know, you think he would know. He's not just a worker in this tradition. So even he's struggling to, well, it's kind of this, it's kind of like that. So they can't be pinned down on what Brahman Atman is because it can't be turned into a concept. And I hear them fumbling. Maybe it's this, it's spiritual osmosis. And when you read, for example, Paul, again, I keep referencing him today because for all of his flaws and his barely submerged, self-hating, anti-Semitic thing that he does, he's a controversial figure, but he's deeply mystical and he's experiencing something. And he's a pretty good writer. And 2/3, maybe a half of Paul's letters in the New Testament are probably actually by Paul. And it's the closest you can get to the first Christian writer in the time of Jesus. Paul was a contemporary of Jesus. They never met. And again, Paul never read any of the Gospels because none of them were written until after he died. So he's really just working with his own mystical experience. And you hear Paul saying things that are kind of as confusing as Lord Yama, that God, our teacher got killed and he's gone. But now we have the inner Christ. And he talks about this thing called the inner Christ, which isn't the Jesus man who lived for 32 years. This is something else. This is I'm going to call it the Atman. This is the presence of divinity within. And then Paul uses this image. He says, we are all of us constitute the body of Christ. So the church now uses that language, right? But the church is the body of Christ. And so there's a corporeal metaphor there about oneness. In the same way that my finger and my eyeball and my toe and my pancreas all do very different things, but they're all part of one body. So it's a really live metaphor to talk about oneness that exists in multiplicity. And so the presence of God in Christianity sounds ultimately very much like the Brahman-Atman conversation that we just had, that Brahman is the ground of being in which we all exist. I think it's in Acts of the Apostles, Paul finds himself in Athens. And Athens, he says, he loved going to Athens because, it's a very philosophical town, obviously. All the philosophers come from there, Plato and all those guys, 500 years before. And Paul says, I love going to Athens. I get huge crowds there, but no converts. So they love a good chat. But Paul's trying to explain God to this room full of Greeks. And he says, and he quotes a Greek poem. That's pretty clever. Reaches into their literature. And he says, he borrows one line. He says, God is where we live and breathe and have our being. And reading that line now, coming as I do from all of these non-dual Vedanta Buddhist Taoist traditions, and I come to this classic Christian scripture where Paul describes God this way, that God is not some guy in the sky judging you. God is where we live and breathe and have our being. That's Brahman. That Brahman is the wooden floor under our feet in this beautiful 1915 home. And the Vedanta tradition and Vivekananda and Ramakrishna and Swami Harinamananda and the Sanskrit language and all these texts. And it's just a beautiful flower of expression that we are invited to participate in. So the Christian theology is, yes, different than some Hindu theology, but again, Meister Eckhart says, while the theologians of the world may quarrel, the mystics of the world all speak the same language. I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Am I doing a song?
Yeah, so
okay.
Peter's going to do a final offering as a prayer. It'll be a song, and just as he's getting his guitar, next week we do have our Krishna Puja. So beginning at 10 a.m., this whole hall will be converted into a shrine. And we will have music, we'll have a worship to Sri Ramakrishna. This is his birthday anniversary. It'll be from 10 o'clock to about 12 o'clock. And then there'll be a Swami from Seattle, Swami Satchimayananda, who will be talking about the concept of an avatar. An avatar is the divine that descends into the human form. So he'll be talking about that. From Seattle, he'll be via Zoom. So you're welcome to come, and we'll have vegetarian food for everybody afterwards. Prasad, it's called. Thank you, Peter, for a wonderful talk, beautiful present. And so if you have to leave, no worries. maybe Peter, you can stay a few more moments
course.
afterwards.
Sure.
We have refreshments in the back.
Yeah.
You can come, maybe you can talk some more here, Peter. It's a Q&A.
Okay, beautiful. So I'm a singer-songwriter too, and I know we've held you here long enough. It feels less like a talk and more like a hostage situation at this point. But we're about to release.
It's not a captive audience, it's a captured audience.
Yes. So, but honestly, we are going to wrap up very, very shortly. But I'm always invited to bring my guitar here. Thank you so much. No other place does that, so I appreciate that. But I am a singer-songwriter. I tell people that was my first job. Was a musician. So here's a song I wrote for all of us who are perceiving these as really hard times and uncertain times. And yet there's something that happens in the Sangha, in the community, when we come together in a space like this. So this is called Circle of Friends. There's grief in the gravy, tears in the wine. There's longing in the candlelight, as powerful as time, that pulls you toward the end of things and further from the start, when everything was new in our true. Here is where we are, alive in this place. To long for something more is such a sad and silly waste. And this is who we are, and these are our hands, alone together in the night, this circle. Now there's a sadness over us that muffles all the words that used to bring us comfort beneath this scattering of birds. And deep down in the darkness, there's still a little light, hidden by the shadow that it casts into the night. And here is where we are, alive and in this place. To long for something more is such a sad and silly waste. And this is who we are, and these are our hands, alone together in the night, this circle of friends. Everything we used to know is slipping through our hands. The things we thought we figured out, we still don't understand. And everything's a mystery, a stage without a play. And wisdom took our tongues and left us nothing much to say. But here is where we are, alive and in this place. To long for something more is such a ridiculous waste. And this is who we are, and these are our hands. We're building it together now, this circle of friends, circle of friends, circle of friends.
And I just wanted to tell everybody that Peter does have a book out. What's the name of the book, Peter, again?
It's called The Seven Stone Path, An Everyday Journey to Wisdom, and I forgot to bring them. I'm a terrible businessman.
But it does explain the different traditions and the wisdom of each of the traditions. It does a beautiful job integrating the different religions so you get the gems of each of the traditions and how they integrate together.
Thank you for that plug.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
And so it's sort of like it's a workbook.
And there's that.
Can you get it at Amazon?
Of course, wherever fine books are sold. And the workbook is free. You can go on my website and download that. It's a PDF, give you a taste of what the book's about. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. So if you'd like to join in more Q&A with Peter and conversation, maybe we can take you to the backyard.
Yeah.
I hope, as refreshments.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, we have refreshments, coffee, tea, like that, and join Peter.
Wonderful. So I'll see some of you out back. Great.